I was elbow deep in grease under the hood of my '92 pickup when I heard the front door slam. My grandpa's oxygen machine gave its usual low hum from the porch, a comforting background noise I'd grown used to over the past year. He sat out there every morning, wrapped in his old army blanket, sipping weak coffee and breathing in the fresh air with the help of that machine. It wasn't fancy, but it kept him alive. Then the power cut. At first, I thought it was a blown fuse. I wiped my hands on a rag and jogged toward the side of the house. But when I saw the extension cord leading from the porch to the outdoor outlet hanging limp and unplugged, my stomach dropped. I followed the cord with my eyes and found her standing there like she owned the planet. Tamara Milburn. HOA president, 50-something. Blonde bob, sunglasses too big for her face, and a clipboard, always a clipboard. She stood by the outlet, arms crossed, lips pressed so tight they could have carved glass. "Are you insane?" I barked. "Why would you unplug his oxygen? It's quiet hours," she said without blinking. "No external electrical noises between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. It's in the bylaws. That's for loud music, not life support. You cut power to his machine." Tamara sniffed like I was the one being unreasonable. "Well, maybe if you'd filed the proper equipment waiver. He's a 90-year-old veteran who needs oxygen to breathe. This isn't a damn pool party permit." She started flipping through her clipboard like she was looking for some sacred page of HOA scripture. "Page 23, she mumbled. "Use of outdoor electrical outlets must comply with community quiet hours." I ignored her and sprinted back to the porch. Grandpa was wheezing heavy, trying to adjust the machine. I plugged it back in, and the hum returned like a heartbeat. His breathing steadied a little, but his eyes were wide and panicked. "You okay, Pop?" He nodded slowly, voice thin. "She just walked up and pulled it." I turned back toward the sidewalk, but Tamara had vanished like a cockroach under a fridge. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my laptop with HOA bylaws open in one window and county ordinances in another. I didn't just want to yell at Tamara, I wanted to bury her in her own rulebook. Cutting power to medical equipment. That was more than a violation. That was criminal. The next morning I went door to door. My neighbors knew Grandpa. He used to mow half their lawns for free before his lungs gave out. I told them what Tamara did. Some of them didn't believe me at first until I showed them the security footage. Yup, I had cameras. Battery-powered ones I installed after Tamara started nitpicking our recycling bins. The footage showed her marching up to the porch, pulling the cord, and walking off like she'd just thrown away trash. "Unbelievable," muttered Mrs. Danner from across the street. "She's lost her mind. She could have killed him," I said. "And she's hiding behind HOA rules to justify it." By noon, I had 12 neighbors willing to give statements. 2 of them were nurses. 1 had a cousin in the sheriff's department. I didn't waste time. I drove straight to the county sheriff's office and asked to speak with someone about a medical endangerment complaint involving an HOA official. The deputy on duty raised an eyebrow but didn't brush me off. When I showed him the footage, his expression darkened. "She just pulled the plug," he asked, didn't even speak to him, just walked up and yanked it. He nodded slowly. "You said your grandfather's dependent on this, every minute. He can't breathe without it." "All right," the deputy said, standing. "You wait right here. I'm getting the sheriff." By the time Sheriff Lott came out, it was clear they were taking this seriously. He was a big guy with a calm voice, someone you'd want on your side in a storm. I gave my statement, showed him the footage again, and handed over the written testimonies from my neighbors. "I'll be honest with you," he said, leaning back in his chair. "This isn't just an HOA matter anymore. If what you're showing me is accurate, this could be criminal negligence, maybe even attempted manslaughter depending on how the DA sees it." "Good," I said. "Because I'm not letting this slide." He tapped his desk. "We'll send someone over to interview your grandfather today, then we'll pay Miss Milburn a visit." As I walked out of the station, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks, hope, but I knew Tamara wouldn't go quietly. She'd built her little HOA fiefdom out of petty fines, threats, and fear. and snakes like her don't slither away without biting back. When I got back from the sheriff's office, Grandpa was still on the porch, bundled in his flannel robe, a crossword puzzle resting on his lap. The oxygen machine buzzed quietly beside him, back to doing its job. I sat on the steps next to him, my legs still buzzing from the adrenaline of the morning. He glanced over his glasses. "You look like a man who just handed someone their own shovel." I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I was still trying to process the fact that Tamara had crossed a line most people wouldn't even approach. Instead, I asked, "You remember that time you told me some people only understand consequences when they come knocking in uniform?" He cracked a small grin. "Looks like they're about to get a visit." By mid-afternoon, 2 unmarked cruisers pulled up across the street. I saw Sheriff Lott step out along with a county investigator. They weren't in any rush, but they moved with purpose. I didn't follow them. I didn't need to. I'd already handed them everything they could possibly need. From inside my garage, I kept an eye on the street through the slats. Tamara answered her door with the same frozen smile she wore at every HOA meeting, like she was always posing for a magazine cover that no one asked for. It didn't last long. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I saw her arms flail, then her expression flatten. After a few more words, the sheriff handed her a slip of paper. Her arms dropped. She stepped back inside without even closing the door. I didn't know exactly what was on the paper, but I had a guess. A formal notice of investigation, maybe even a temporary injunction. Either way, she looked rattled. The next morning, I got a visit of my own, this time from a man in a charcoal suit with a badge clipped to his belt. He introduced himself as Assistant District Attorney Reuben Clay. Said he was following up on the report the Sheriff's Department filed. We sat at my kitchen table, the same spot where I'd spent the previous night scouring municipal codes. Clay pulled out a small recorder and asked to go over my statement directly. "Have you had any prior confrontations with Miss Milburn regarding your grandfather's health equipment?" he asked, voice steady but not cold. "None," I said. "She's issued warnings before about things like lawn length or where I park the truck, but never anything medical." He jotted notes as I spoke. "And you're certain the footage hasn't been altered? It's a direct download from the camera's internal memory. No edits, time stamped and everything." He leaned back and crossed his arms. "We reached out to your grandfather's pulmonologist. He confirmed that the oxygen concentrator is essential for his condition, especially during early morning hours when blood oxygen levels drop naturally." I nodded. "Without it, he'd suffocate in his sleep." Clay's tone shifted slightly. "I want you to understand something." "What, Miss Milburn did falls into a very specific category. When someone knowingly disables life-sustaining equipment and it results in medical risk, it can be pursued under felony endangerment statutes." I didn't respond. I just let that sink in. "Now, the tricky part is motive," Clay continued. "She'll claim she was enforcing an HOA policy, not acting with malice. But if we can prove she understood the consequences and acted anyway, we've got a case." "She didn't just ignore the consequences," I said. "She was told. I spoke to her right after it happened." "She didn't care." His pen stopped. "You told her it was life-sustaining." She watched him struggling to breathe. "That's not something you miss." Clay nodded once and closed his notebook. "That'll help. We'll be in touch." Word got around fast. By late afternoon, half the neighborhood knew Tamara was under criminal investigation. But instead of laying low, she doubled down. That evening, I found a notice taped to my front door. A violation. Handwritten in red ink, as if that made it more official. It claimed I'd installed unauthorized surveillance and harassed a board member during community enforcement procedures, a laughable attempt at retaliation. I walked straight across the street to the Martins, who'd been on the HOA board for years, but mostly kept their heads down. "Did you see this?" I held up the violation. Mr. Martin frowned. "She didn't run that through the board. There hasn't been a meeting since last week. So she's issuing citations on her own now." He hesitated. "Technically, she's not supposed to." Any new penalties have to be approved by majority vote. Then I want it on record. She's abusing her authority. Mrs. Martin leaned forward. We'll call an emergency session tomorrow night at the community center. I thanked them and left. For the first time, I felt the board cracking. Tamara had ruled by intimidation and bureaucracy, but now she'd overstepped in front of too many witnesses. The emergency meeting was standing room only. Word had spread beyond our street. Residents from 2 blocks over showed up, some with their own stories. The Martins sat at the long folding table in front, and for once, Tamara didn't take the center seat. She stood off to the side, arms crossed, jaw tight. Her usual air of control had been replaced with something else, panic barely hidden behind cosmetic confidence. Mr. Martin cleared his throat. We're here tonight to address 2 issues. First, the recent incident involving Mr. Whitlow's medical equipment. Second, the question of procedural violations committed by our current president. A hand shot up in the audience, Mrs. Klein, who lived near the cul-de-sac. I'd like to ask why we weren't notified of any action being taken against the Whitlow family. If a neighbor's life was at risk, shouldn't that have been brought to the board first? Mr. Martin nodded. That's exactly the concern. The discussion snowballed. More residents spoke up. A contractor named Leo described how Tamara fined him $400 for leaving a ladder in his driveway an hour past sunset. Another woman said Tamara threatened to have her car towed for having a bumper sticker she didn't like. Then I stood up. She didn't just break a rule. She tried to enforce one in a way that endangered someone's life. That's not mismanagement, that's criminal behavior. Tamara finally spoke, voice sharp. I was following the bylaws. If we start making exceptions for every sad story, the rules mean nothing. That was her mistake, Mr. Martin leaned forward. Tamara, did you consult with the board before taking action? No, because I didn't need to. It was a clear violation. So you acted on your own authority, again. She didn't answer. Then Mrs. Martin stood. We're calling a vote to suspend Tamara Milburn from acting in her role as president pending the outcome of ongoing legal proceedings. All in favor? Hands shot up across the room. Mine included. Only 2 people didn't raise theirs, Tamara, and a man I didn't recognize sitting near the back, probably her latest recruit. The Martins turned back to the crowd. Effective immediately, Tamara is relieved of all HOA duties. A special election will be held next month. Tamara stormed out, heels clacking like gunfire against the tile. After the meeting, I stepped outside and found 2 of the sheriff's deputies waiting by their cruiser. One nodded toward me. She's not going to make this easy, he said. But we've got what we need to move forward. I exhaled slowly. Good, because I'm not stopping until she answers for what she did. He glanced toward the street. You might want to keep an eye on your mailbox. People like her don't go down quiet. I already knew that. But for the first time since this whole thing started, I wasn't alone. The neighborhood had seen her for what she really was, and the law was finally catching up. The morning after Tamara's suspension felt off, not peaceful. Just quieter in a way that made you lean in and wait for the next shoe to drop. I was back under the hood of the truck, trying to replace a warped serpentine belt, when I saw the county utility van crawl up the street like it was lost. It stopped in front of my house. 2 workers popped out, both wearing hard hats, neither looking particularly apologetic. One of them approached, clipboard in hand. You Todd Whitlow? I wiped my hands on my jeans. That's me. We've got a work order to inspect your external wiring. Possible municipal code violation. I stared at him. You mean the outlet on the porch, he nodded. Complaint was filed anonymously. Said you were illegally modifying electrical infrastructure to avoid HOA enforcement. I laughed once, flat and humorless. She's still coming after us. The guy looked uncomfortable. We just follow the order. If everything checks out, you're good. I stepped aside. Be my guest. It's a standard outdoor outlet. Been there since the house was built in '87. They got to work. I paced the edge of the lawn, watching them measure voltages and take photos. Halfway through, one of the workers motioned me over. Mind if I take a look at your breaker box? Sure, it's on the side near the garage. He followed me around, opened the panel, and stared at it for a long beat. Something wrong, he knelt and pointed. See that marker residue? Someone tampered with this recently. Looks like a lockout tag was removed. I crouched next to him. Like someone tried to shut off the whole box, he nodded. Usually only utility or code enforcement does that, but we didn't. And there's no record of an order from us. I stood up slowly. You're saying someone tried to cut power to the whole house? Could have been a prank. Could have been someone with access to the panel, but whatever it wasn't official. My mouth felt dry. Can you document that? The worker glanced at the panel again. Yeah, I'll note it in the report. You might want to talk to law enforcement, though. This goes beyond a noise complaint. That night, I went over every square inch of the exterior with a flashlight. The screws on the breaker box had been loosened and red-ironed just slightly, but enough to leave tool marks. Someone had deliberately tried to shut us down. I filed a second police report. Deputy Lenhart came out to take a look. He was younger than the others I'd spoken with, but he knew his way around an evidence bag. He took photos, asked for permission to collect the screws, and called it into the station. You think this is related to the ongoing investigation? I asked. He zipped the bag and sealed it with a strip of red tape. Looks like someone's trying to intimidate you, but doing it through the electrical panel, that's reckless and illegal. I watched him load the evidence into his cruiser. Can you subpoena HOA communications? He shut the trunk. That'll be up to the ADA. But if there's any record she told someone to do this, it's going to get real serious real fast. The following day, my neighbor, Leo the contractor who'd been fined for a ladder, came over holding a thick manila folder. You're not the only one she's targeted, he said. He handed me the folder. Inside were printed emails, scans of fines, and a typed letter from a former HOA treasurer who'd resigned last year. She was embezzling, Leo said. Small amounts at first, rounding up contractor fees, charging for non-existent landscaping. It added up. When the treasurer confronted her, she threatened to report her for tax fraud. I flipped through the documents. Some were years old, others were dated within the past few months. Why didn't anyone go to the police? They were scared. She had dirt on people. Surveillance photos of violations, rumors she spread. One guy moved out overnight after she accused him of running an unlicensed daycare. I stared at the letter. The treasurer had detailed everything: names, dates, fake invoices, even the name of a shell landscaping company that never did any actual work. This is enough to bury her, I said. Leo nodded. That's why I'm giving it to you. You've already got momentum, the rest of us. We stayed quiet too long. I scanned the documents and emailed them to Ada Clay that same night. The response came the next morning. Clay didn't waste time. He called directly. Where did you get this? He asked. Neighbor, he's got originals. Said the treasurer would be willing to testify if she's protected. Tell her she'll have immunity. We're opening a secondary investigation. If this pans out, we're looking at felony fraud, wire fraud, and possibly racketeering. Do you have a secure place to store the originals? I can lock them in my safe. Good, keep them there. We're going to request a formal statement from your neighbor and the former treasurer. In the meantime, don't confront her. Let us handle it. I hung up and immediately drove to Leo's place. He handed me the originals and I locked them away before sunset. That evening, the neighborhood buzzed. Word had gotten out again. This time, it wasn't just about a power cord or a citation. It was about fraud, theft, and criminal conspiracy. Mrs. Klein organized a town hall meeting, informal, but packed to the rafters. People brought copies of their own HOA fines and notices. One man stood up and said he'd paid over $2,500 in compliance fees that never showed up on any official ledger. Another woman showed photos of her driveway before and after a supposed violation that led to a lien being placed on her home. The before photo had been digitally altered. She faked violations, she said, voice shaking. She photoshopped weeds into my garden. Someone else shouted from the back. She tried to find me for a trampoline that belonged to the house next door. It was chaos, but the kind of chaos that meant people were finally waking up. At the center of it, I stood and raised my voice. We have a chance to fix this, to replace every crooked policy she put in place, but we need to take it all the way. That means working with the HOA, testifying if it comes to it, and not backing down. A murmur of agreement rolled through the crowd. That night, 2 more residents dropped evidence at my door. Emails, scanned receipts, even a voicemail where Tamara threatened someone with legal consequences if they didn't repaint their mailbox. The voice was unmistakably hers. 3 days later, Clay called again. This time, his tone was clipped and urgent. "We've got a warrant. Her property will be searched tomorrow morning. We found a back channel she used to transfer HOA funds into a private account. Over $19,000 misappropriated. If she fights it, we're adding obstruction." I didn't sleep that night. At 7 the next morning, I sat on my porch with Grandpa, both of us wrapped in jackets against the cold. He didn't need to say anything. The hum of the oxygen machine was steady as ever. We watched together as 4 county cruisers pulled up in front of Tamara's house. She came out in a robe, yelling before the doors even opened, but the deputies didn't flinch. One handed her the warrant. Another began photographing the front yard. Within minutes, they were inside. The whole neighborhood watched from behind curtains or from porches. Nobody stepped in. Nobody defended her. The silence spoke louder than any speech. An hour later, they walked her out in cuffs. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't say a word. But as they drove her away, I saw something that stuck with me. A single pink notice in her mailbox. An overdue fine. The irony wasn't lost on me. Later that week, the county held a press conference. Clay stood at the podium and listed the charges: endangerment, criminal mischief, fraud, falsifying documents, abuse of power, and obstruction of justice. They were pursuing a full indictment. The HOA board was dissolved by emergency vote. A temporary oversight committee was appointed by the county until a lawful election could be held. And me, I got a thank you letter from the sheriff's department and a call from a local reporter who wanted to do a story on the whole mess. I declined, because it wasn't about recognition. It was about making sure someone like Tamara Milburn never got to hold that kind of power again. Not in this neighborhood. Not anywhere. The week after Tamara's arrest was the first time in months that the neighborhood actually felt like a place people lived, not just tolerated. Kids played in front yards. Neighbors waved without suspicion. The air felt lighter, like someone had finally opened a window in a smoke-filled room. But just because the queen had been knocked off her perch didn't mean the mess she left behind had disappeared. I was in the garage going through a stack of old HOA notices I hadn't bothered to throw out when Leo showed up again. He didn't knock, just leaned around the frame like he owned the place, holding 2 coffees and a folder tucked under his arm. "You're not gonna believe this," he said. "What now? Check this out." He handed me the folder. Inside were copies of bank statements, but not from Tamara's account. These were from someone named Bennett Greeley. "Who's this?" One of her old vendors. "Remember the fake landscaping company?" Turns out it's registered under this guy's name. He's not just a straw owner, he's her cousin. Lives out in Laramie. I flipped through the statements. Thousands of dollars transferred month after month, labeled as groundskeeping and seasonal cleanup. The problem was, no one had seen anyone maintaining common areas for over a year. She was funneling money through family, I said. Yup. And get this, he's already under investigation in Wyoming for a different HOA scam. Same playbook. Fines, fake repairs, pocket the payouts. That night, I called Ada Clay again. He answered on the second ring. "We might have another angle," I said. "Nepotism, wire fraud, maybe interstate conspiracy." He listened without interrupting. Then asked, "Can you get me everything, originals, not copies, and a written statement from whoever found this? Leo will deliver it himself." "Good. Make sure he hands it to my assistant." "We're compiling a federal referral. This crossed state lines." I didn't need to ask what that meant. If the feds got involved, Tamara wasn't just looking at time, she was looking at years. The following morning, I walked Grandpa out to the porch. He was stronger now. Not by much, but enough to stand with his walker and sip his coffee without trembling. The oxygen machine hummed beside him, as dependable as ever. "Did you know she had family in on it?" he asked, voice raspier than usual. "Not until yesterday." He gazed down the street. "Always knew there was more under the surface. People that obsessed with rules usually have something to hide." He was right. And we were about to find out just how deep it went. By the end of the week, subpoenas were issued for Greeley's Wyoming company. Clay confirmed that federal investigators had begun a financial audit of every HOA transaction from the past 5 years. The paper trail was damning. Tamara had created ghost vendors, diverted community repair funds, and even approved a roof replacement for a house that had no roof damage. Turns out, it belonged to one of her silent supporters on the board. The Martins, who had taken over temporary leadership, held a town-wide meeting. This time, it wasn't in the community center. It was out in the open at the park near the lake, where people could speak without fear of glares or scribbled citations. Leo brought a whiteboard. Mrs. Klein brought a microphone. And I brought copies of the vendor statements with key sections highlighted for the press, who had finally shown up now that the story had hit the county news cycle. Tamara wasn't just a tyrant, Leo told the crowd. She was a thief, a liar. And she used the HOA to run a racket. The crowd didn't need convincing. People were already angry. But what they needed now was clarity: how to fix it, how to prevent it from happening again, and most importantly, how to make sure no one like her would ever hold power over them again. That's when I stood up and proposed the bylaw amendment. "It's simple," I said. "No one can serve on the HOA board if they have direct financial ties to any vendor. Full transparency of all disbursements. Mandatory third-party audits every year. And no enforcement action can be taken without full board approval and written notice to the resident. Period." There were murmurs of agreement. Someone clapped. Then more followed. We voted right there in the park. It wasn't official yet, not until the new board was elected, but it was a start. A promise, made in front of everyone, that we weren't going back to how things were. 2 days later, Clay called again. "We've got a plea deal on the table. Tamara's attorney knows she's cooked. She's offering full cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence." "What does that mean?" "She'll name every participant, every accomplice, every vendor she falsified, but she wants to serve time in state prison, not federal." I thought about it for a long moment. She endangered lives. She stole from families. She tried to shut down my house's power again even after the sheriff got involved. "I know," Clay said, "but if she talks, we get the rest of them. Greeley, the fake contractors, the bank that processed the payments without verifying the accounts. We take down the whole network. Then let her talk." By the end of the month, 4 more people were indicted. Greeley was arrested in Wyoming and extradited for interstate fraud. 2 former board members were charged with conspiracy. The landscaping company was dissolved, and over $20,000 in stolen HOA funds were recovered. Tamara pled guilty to multiple counts of financial misconduct, criminal endangerment, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. She received a 6-year sentence with eligibility for parole after 4. The judge didn't mince words during sentencing. "Your actions put a man's life at risk, destabilized a community, and violated the trust placed in you. This court finds no justification for your conduct." She didn't look at me when they led her away. She didn't look at anyone. But justice had been served. The neighborhood, once strangled by fear and pettiness, began to rebuild. The new board was elected with overwhelming turnout. I declined to run. I'd had enough of HOA politics to last a lifetime, but I helped draft the new charter, which included protections for medically necessary equipment, a whistleblower clause, and a zero-tolerance policy for financial conflicts of interest. The community center was renamed in honor of Grandpa's service. They called it Whitlow Hall. He didn't say much when they unveiled the plaque, just nodded once and muttered something about not being one for fanfare. But I saw the way he looked at it. The way his hand rested on the brass lettering a moment too long. Late one afternoon, I found myself back in the garage, tightening bolts on the old truck. The sun was setting, painting the street in amber light. Leo walked over, hands in his pockets. "You ever think it'd end like this?" he asked. "No, not even close." He leaned against the doorframe. "You know, you could have walked away, let someone else deal with it." "I couldn't, not after what she did," he nodded. "Well, it's over now. We got our neighborhood back." As he walked off, I looked down the street. Kids were riding bikes. Someone was grilling. A couple watered their garden without looking over their shoulder. It wasn't perfect. It never would be, but the fear was gone. The silence had been broken. And the rules. They finally served the people, not the petty tyrants who used to wield them like weapons. And that was enough.